Hey there, I'm Bailey and welcome to my channel where we discuss all the tips and tricks necessary for you to live a life of adventure. If you are just thinking about starting to hike with your dog and are unsure of what gear you need to take with you, then this is the video for you. I know it can be a bit intimidating when you see pictures of dogs all geared up in their rec specs, booties, jackets, what have you, running around out in the woods with their owners. And you might be thinking, boy, it must be really expensive getting all that gear and getting ready to go hike with your dogs. Well, fortunately for you, that really is not actually the case. And so I want to go through all of the things that I think are actually necessary for you to get started hiking with your dogs. Now, that's not to say that you can't get other pieces of gear later on, but all I'm saying is that when you are first starting out hiking, that you don't necessarily have to have all the latest and greatest, most expensive gear in order to enjoy spending time out in the woods with your dogs. So what is the first thing that you need if you're going to go out and hike with your dog? Well, this should be hopefully somewhat obvious because it's the same thing you need if you even walk out your front door, and that is a leash and collar for your dog. Now, a lot of people are always asking for the best kinds of leashes and stuff, and I will say, in my opinion, you don't necessarily need any sort of fancy leash in order to enjoy hiking. I would encourage you to steer clear of things like flexi leads just because they can easily tangle up with other people, dogs, the trees, whatever, and it can also be hard to keep control of your dog on a narrow trail. But as long as you're using some sort of 6-foot leash, then you should be good to go. Personally, I use British slip leads with my dogs, particularly because I let them off leash a lot, so it's easier to take on and off. However, any sort of snap lead, biothane leashes, because they're waterproof, like the cool rope carabiner leads, all of those work. It's just really, again, comes down to your personal preference, and I would say use what you have first, and then, you can experiment down the road and see what sort of thing might work better for you and your dog. Now, same thing kind of goes with collars. I mean, again, a lot of people, especially people that have water-loving dogs, really tout those biothane collars because they don't get all soggy and wet if your dog likes to go for frequent swims. However, personally for my dogs, they don't really swim, so really any collar works just fine. The biggest thing is that you want to make sure that your dog's information is up to date, and that, of course, it goes with whatever kind of training you do with your dogs. Some people are really big advocates of using a harness, and I would say that if that's something you're interested in using, that's perfectly fine. I typically don't use a harness with my dogs just because I am more in the camp that your dog should just be well trained no matter what. And to me, having a leverage or a handle is not necessarily useful for rock hopping and that kind of thing. I'm just able to pick my dog up. But I know there's a lot of people that like a harness to give their dogs a lift. But again, I don't think a harness is really 100% necessary if you were just getting started. And I would say as long as your dog can walk nicely on a leash, then you should be good to go, and you can always add a harness in at a later date. Now, the second thing I want to talk about that I would hope, again, would be somewhat obvious would be dog poop bags. So again, just like when you go for a walk around your neighborhood, you need to make sure to take poop bags with you and pick up after your dog. Now, you can use, again, any sort of leash. I've used baggies, grocery bags, whatever in an emergency, whatever you can find to pick it up and take it out with you. However, I do prefer to use eco bags, especially because I live near the ocean, just to be a bit more environmentally conscious. But other than that, it's up to you. If you want some more tips about what to do with your dog's poop when you're hiking, then I would definitely encourage you to check out this video next. It's different tips on how to carry it out so it doesn't make your bag smell, and as well as some other options that you could consider when you're in the backcountry with your dog. Now, those first two items are things that you should take with you no matter how long your hike is. The third one, I would also encourage you to take on pretty much any walk you go on. Of course, if you're going for something that's like a mile long, close to the car, you might not need this, but for the majority of your hikes you would, and that would be water and a water bowl or some way to give your dogs water. Now again, the nice thing about this is really it does not have to be anything fancy. You could just use any old water bottle lying around the house, fill it up, as well as just bring something to put water in. And again, you could bring a fancy collapsible dog bowl. I recently spent a whole bunch of money that I probably didn't need to on a fancy ultralight dog bowl for backpacking, but really, again, it could be anything as simple as just a Tupperware container that you are no longer using for food. So just a water bottle from your cabinet, a piece of Tupperware that's fairly light, and you're good to go on the waterfront. So I would just say to, bring more than you think you need. That way you don't run out on accident. Some dogs are a little bit reluctant to drink, so, keep that in mind. And then otherwise, you should be good to go. Item number 4 would be first aid items. So this is going to vary a little bit between owners just based off your experience. And I would definitely suggest considering bringing things that you know how to use And if you don't know how to use anything, then you might want to consider just learning some basic first aid, especially if you think this is something you're going to be doing more of in the future. Most first aid items that you find in a human first aid kit work just fine for dogs. Really, I don't add a whole bunch extra for my dogs. I would just say to be cognizant of the fact that you should not usually give dogs drugs that you would use for yourself. So usually this is talking about like our pain relievers, so like especially Tylenol and ibuprofen, you should not give those to dogs. Benadryl, you should ask your vet on a dosage before giving it to your dogs. Really, if you don't know, just don't give it to them. However, things like gauze and other bandages usually work just fine on people and dogs. I do usually pack some extra bandaging materials specifically for my dogs, such as vet wrap, but that's because I already know how to use them for my dogs, and so I'm comfortable bringing it with me into the backcountry. Some other things you could consider bringing or adding specifically for your dogs would be an emergency pair of booties. So whether your dog wears booties or not hiking, it's nice to have at least one or two. That way if your dog gashes their foot while you're in the backcountry, you can slip it on so they can get to the car in one piece. So another thing you could think about adding to your first aid kit would be an emergency carry sling. This is something that I don't actually carry with me all that often, but I do think about what I would do if my dog got injured and how I could get them out. If you're really just getting started hiking though, there's probably not a big need for this, because if you're like me, then you probably are just starting out on trails that are close to town and have good cell service. I know a lot of the trails that I frequented when I first got started, and as well as in the winter when I'm not really doing a lot of big hikes, are usually pretty close, and I can call someone from the trail if I really need help. As you get going and start doing harder hikes that are more remote, then you could consider down the road adding a personal locator beacon. That way you could call for help if you needed to. So overall, I think those are really the most critical items to make sure to take with you if you are just getting started day hiking with your dogs. There are some items that some people might bring depending on their area, or that you might want to consider adding right off the bat, but it will be up to you. So some things might include a pack for your dog to carry some of their gear. You know, a lot of people really like having their dog carry their poop or carry some of their own supplies, so that's something you could get if you have money to spend. But I really don't think it's necessary. It's not something your dog has to have. If it's pretty cold, or you have a dog that's short hair and is sensitive to colder weather, then considering some sort of sweater, or conversely, if you're hiking someplace that's very hot like the desert and your dog overheats easily, then you could consider getting a cooling coat to have them to wear to help keep them cooler. Definitely treats for training your dog. If your dog isn't used to being out and about and is still working on their manners, and bringing some sort of treats so you can keep working on teaching your dog to be well behaved in public is a good idea, as well as some sort of visibility. So this could be like low-up collars if you are hiking in the dark, or something like an orange bandana if you're hiking during hunting season. I did mention booties earlier, and I do want to say that for most dogs, booties aren't usually the best choice for hiking, especially if it's not snow or extreme heat, just because they can do more damage than they do good. But maybe your dog has tender paws, and so you might want to consider adding booties down the road, or you can consider doing something like Musher's Secret, which again, I don't think is very necessary for all dogs for day hiking, as long as you properly condition their feet first. So another thing for you to kind of think about, especially if you're someone who's experienced hiking, just not with dogs, is how could you adapt to the 10 essentials in order to include your dog? So if you don't know what the 10 essentials, I would really recommend watching that video next. It's basically everything you should bring in order to make sure that you will be able to survive an emergency. So really, most of my day hiking supplies work well for my dogs and include them in the 10 essentials, and then I just add some things in order to make sure that they would be able to stay comfortable as well in case we had to stay in the woods overnight if something happened to one of us. Now, I would love to know, is there anything you bring on your day hikes that you think I've left out? Or do you have any specific questions about any of these pieces of gear I've talked about? If so, be sure to let me know down in the comments below. Also, if you found this video to be helpful, I'd greatly appreciate a thumbs up. That just lets me know that I should keep making more videos just like this. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and happy trails.